Great. Well, thank you everyone for being here this morning. To start, I think one of the concepts that has been so influential to me in my journey is the idea to gain experiences and figure out how to put them together later. It was advice that a leader that I worked with gave to me and gave to many within our organization, that idea that as you go through your career, you're going to be gaining experiences and figuring out how to put them together later. Because when I was sitting in your seats at that time, as Dr. Wright said, at the guest executive dinners, I had no clue what I would experience throughout my personal and professional career. The ups and downs that I would experience both during my days here at Houghton and beyond. And while some of those stories can be ones we either cover in the Q&A or subjects of whole chapel speeches, today I want to talk a little bit to help you understand a bit about what my journey looked like. I'll start with that during my time here at Houghton. And I think it's really important for me to highlight what was one of the most important things about my Houghton experience: the value of relationships. I could show many pictures of many people, but I'll focus on these. You'll see my buddy Nate in two of the pictures alongside me with his wife Joy and my friend Bob. The relationships that we developed over our 4 years here at Houghton, and Nate and I got a little bonus to that because we actually were welcome weekend roommates, has been incredible. And it has only grown deeper as time has continued. Freshman year, Joy and I was John Davidson, she was Joy Davidson, not related, but somehow I ended up with her laptop freshman year, she ended up with my paycheck. Quite frankly, I would rather the paycheck had come to me, but we became fast friends. This group of people were people that we've seen highs and lows of our lives, we've been in one another's weddings, and as I reflect back on my time at Houghton, it's the friendships I had with classmates and the relationships that I then built, especially with two professors. And I'll highlight each of them. I'll start with why I came to Houghton in part. I came to Houghton because throughout my high school years, I had had the privilege of doing full summer international mission trips around the world. And I came here wanting to make sure that I got 30 hours of Bible and missions classes because God was going to use me, so I thought, to send students around the world on short-term mission trips. And so right in my welcome weekend, as I'm signing up for classes, I knew I wanted to be a communications major, and I had heard amazing things about this chair of communications, Dr. Doug Gardy. Who here has Dr. Gardy for any classes, past or present? You are lucky, lucky people. I sat across from him and on the spot asked him to be my advisor, and so began a 20-year relationship that has continued even to having dinner with him earlier this week. But you probably recall from my bio that I don't send short-term mission trips around the world. God used those experiences in many ways to get me to Houghton. And then something happened. May term, end of freshman year, leadership principles. I attended this class, we met in the music building, and something started to change. I found as we went through leadership content from John Maxwell, a popular leadership guru and former pastor, about the value of leadership, influence, management. And all of a sudden, through the tutelage, mentorship, and relationship that I started to form with then chair of the business department, Ken Bates, who's with us here today, that other influential seed of faculty investment started to change the trajectory of my life. As things would have it, I ended up making use of every single class. I stayed on that track of communications. I still got those Bible and missions classes, but I added a business minor, a concentration in human resource management. I helped found the student chapter of the Society for Human Resource Management here on campus, and when I look back, I don't believe there was a single credit that I took while at Houghton that didn't count for a general education, major, minor, or concentration. Even back then, without having the advice, I was gaining experiences and figuring out how to put them together later. That took me to my post-Houghton journey. Many ups and downs, many experiences, even in those first 9 months after leaving here. For me, it took me to new places. I had been born in North Jersey, moved to Massachusetts when I was 4, so I consider myself from the greater Boston area, came to, at that time, Houghton College, and then at the end of Houghton, I relocated to a place where I knew pretty much no one. The girl I was seeing at the time was starting physician assistant school down in Allentown, Pennsylvania, an hour and a half north of Philadelphia, about an hour and a half, maybe closer to 2 hours west of New York City. And I loved it. I loved the region. I loved the relationships I was building, the church I was getting connected to. As things would have it, the relationship did not continue. But I found that I really had been planted in a great place that I never would have expected. If you remember back to the pictures, Bob White lived in Ohio. Nate and Joy had relocated to Maryland. If I had moved back to Boston, my relationships with them would not be as rich as they are today. I lived there for about a half dozen years, met my wife through online dating, dated long distance. She was doing her grad work out at Purdue, so while I am not the Dr. Davidson, it's my wife who is. She's the PhD. I did recently have to correct someone that had something addressed to us as Dr. and Mrs. Davidson and make sure they knew it was Mr. and Dr. Davidson. But I became a transplant to Indiana for about the first 3 years of our marriage. I got to be on staff with Purdue University, great experience, and then we ended up relocating back to Allentown. Not because we had any family there, we don't, but because Allison happened to find a great professorship at a local college. And my former employer came knocking, actively recruiting me to come back to them. Another example of gaining experiences, no clue that that was how I was going to put them together later. Since then, I've been blessed with Allison with 2 kids. Mackenzie turned 7 3 days ago. I was home for the birthday. And Scott is 4. They keep life fun and interesting for us. And Allison and I each have worked to balance our professional lives and our personal lives. I've had the privilege of working for many large employers, as Ben mentioned, working in many different industries. I intentionally have cultivated a career that is not just healthcare related, not just higher education. In fact, when the time came, you'll see some of my education here, to go for my MBA, I purposely did not pursue a concentration in healthcare or project management because my career, I felt, my story, we call it sometimes a career narrative, already spoke to experience and knowledge in each of those fields. I hope when I get home tomorrow I don't lose my job, but if I were for some reason, I have tried to maintain a flexibility that I could go into most any different industry or organization and be successful. But to do so, I have needed this middle row of my education, building on what I have here at Houghton, and I'm ever so privileged and happy for the time I had here at Houghton, but later earning a Master's of Arts in Business Communication, marrying the communication and business fields that I really liked, and then later going back for that MBA because I recognized that those initials are very well recognized and would be an asset as I continued my learning. I even went along and earned a couple of certifications, the most recent of which was the PMP, or the Project Management Professional Certification. And this was to demonstrate the knowledge that I had attained and the level of acumen I had developed in the project management field. I earned it after I was in a project management role, not because I needed it, but again, I knew that that experience would be a benefit for my story. I've continued to be active in a number of different professional associations. It keeps me current on my knowledge and skills. I've even had the privilege of speaking at some national conferences for other associations, and it's been a great experience to help me continue to grow. What I'll shift to right now is talking a little bit about Lehigh Valley Health Network. I have no concerns if any of you want to talk to me about the possibility of a role in the Allentown region. But even if you're not interested in that, it is really helpful to understand some of the things you might want to look at when you're considering jobs. With great respect to everyone I interacted with here, and this could just be my faulty memory, I don't remember anyone ever saying at a certain point of my senior year, hey, you should start looking for a job now. And so I was probably late in the process of looking for roles. So let me give you an overview of Lehigh Valley Health Network. While we don't do many internships outside of a summer research program, as Ben mentioned, every organization needs some level of human resources, technology, marketing, and finance support. So even with an organization like this, it's not all just doctors or nurses. I have really enjoyed being one of the individuals that helps make the doctors and nurses able to be successful. When you're looking for an organization, it's incredibly helpful to understand a little bit about it. To understand, for example, its size and scope. Some people flourish being in small organizations, wearing many hats, being really resourceful to jump in wherever they want. I personally have loved being a part of very large organizations. We're spread across 10 counties in Pennsylvania, plenty of hospitals, because I get to both specialize, but also then find the ways that I can help our leaders tackle whatever the newest and latest challenges are. It's also helpful to be familiar with any accolades that organization has earned. Surveys aren't everything, but it certainly says something if you see that an organization has been recognized as a great place to work. I think it's also really important that you understand a little bit about an organization's values. Here's a list of LVHN's 4 core values. And one of the things I've enjoyed about LVHN is that for a long time we've looked at things in terms of behaviors and technical skills. And at the end of the day, if I had to pick one of those, and thankfully you're Houghton students, so you tend to have behaviors in spades, it's the behaviors that I would much rather someone have. I can deal with your situation if you want to be rude and disrespectful and not punctual, but I find that to be far more difficult to deal with than to teach you how to do equations in Excel, manage supply vendor relationships, be able to understand and follow a flow chart. So LVHN for a long time has had that philosophy of we would rather search for the people that have the right behaviors and teach them those technical skills. Certainly some technical skills are a minimum expectation. You're not coming into our hospital and operating on someone if you haven't gone to med school and reached certain requirements. But I do think understanding about an organization's culture is really important. Along with that is how that organization is structured. This is what the leadership levels look like at LVHN, and it's helpful because I was interviewing once at another organization for an administrator of human resources. And the woman said, why on earth are you interested in this job? Well, the posting was pretty vague. I didn't understand what it was about, and it turns out they wanted a secretary, a human resources secretary. And I have great respect for secretaries, but it wasn't the role I was looking for. And I explained I'm used to the administrator title being right next to a vice president, and I very respectfully, and she understood, withdrew right in that interview because we knew it wasn't the right fit. When you're looking for a job, they're interviewing you, but you're interviewing them as well to make sure that it's the right fit for you. And so across my career at LVHN, I've had a number of different roles. There's a little gap there for my time at Purdue between lines 1 and 2. But what I want to especially highlight here is the fact that most of these positions would not be what we traditionally consider leadership or managerial roles. But I would argue I have been leading for years. And it is, in my estimation, far more difficult to lead when you have no positional authority, when you rely on your own influence and interpersonal relationship skills, than when you have a title that gives you certain authority. I'm certainly mindful never to abuse the title and the authority I may have, but I think it's important to think about the ability that you have towards leadership in any of those capacities. When we break for questions in a little bit, I have a number of reference slides, things that wouldn't quite fit to my opening comments, but we'll take this discussion in any direction you want. But I do want to highlight a few points that I think are important for you to have. How you start matters. Whether you're a leader or not, how you enter a team or an organization matters. And so some of these slides, if you were someone that worked on the team I'm with right now, would look incredibly familiar, including this one. Because when I started my leadership role a year ago, I got together with the team. I was new. I was unknown. They may have seen me in the halls, but they didn't know what I was about. So I went ahead and showed them slides of where I had lived, who my family was, what my professional background was, and some of my style, so that they could understand who this new person was that they were going to get to work with. I wanted them to know the difference between my style and my expectations. Some leaders have an expectation that if they send you an email at 8 o'clock at night, you better be checking that and responding to it. That's not my style. My style as a life integrator is that I may do some work off hours and send you that email at 8, but there's no need for you to respond to it. If I need you for something that's an emergency, I'll send you a text message. So relax, enjoy your time. I want to respect your evenings. These sorts of things, reminding them that their vacation or paid time off was there for a reason, I wanted them to use it, helped to set the temperature, the sense of what our relationship might look like. And so as a new colleague, even if you're not a leader, getting a chance to sit down with people, we affectionately call them meet and greets when someone is new, really helps build those relationships right from the get-go. I also invest in my learning. I keep an online spreadsheet right in Google Docs, all the books I've read for probably the last 7 to 8 years. I read or listened to about 40 last year. I'm probably on pace to do the same. It's hard to boil down a list to some of my favorites, but taking the time to continue to invest in your learning is critically important. The concepts that you can get out of a $10, $20 book are immense when they help you to continue to grow as a professional. And is anyone familiar with and comfortable sharing what an informational interview is? This is a foreign concept to anyone who wasn't here yesterday? Sure, go
I was
ahead.
here yesterday. Well, an informational interview is when you kind of interview an employer to see kind of what they're like, what working for them is going to be, and they give you the kind of information you need to see if it's something that you want to pursue.
Absolutely, spot on. She was listening yesterday or may have known it already. Which would you prefer? Pursue a master's degree, spend tens of thousands of dollars, work for 15 years, and end up in a position that you hate? Or send someone a LinkedIn message, pay for a cup of coffee, and sit down for 30 minutes and say, how did you get to where you are? I'm interested in your job, your organization, or your industry. What do you like? What do you dislike? Frankly, for me, I would prefer the latter. Because so many people can end up in a situation, in a job years down the road, that they hate. That if they had just invested a little bit of time, the cost of a cup of coffee, they could have learned that was not the right path for them. Maybe the hours are terrible. Maybe the amount of time they'd have to spend before they got to the role they wanted was not going to be really of interest to them. Taking the time, especially as students, to do an informational interview is incredibly important. I do an informational interview with about anyone that reached out to me on LinkedIn these days, and even more so to a current college student that was trying to better direct their future trajectory. I'll also highlight that my faith informs the work that I do. I actually was very lucky that in my opening meeting with the team, someone knew of Houghton. Knew that it was a Christian school, and the team at large learned right then that I was a Christian. I don't hide the fact that I'm a Christian. My faith informs the way I interact with others and the way I choose to lead. But I'm also very mindful that it doesn't dominate. I am not someone that is standing around going, Jesus, 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 all day long and constantly bringing up my faith over and over and over. People may not share the same faith as I do, but I have had people tell me that they recognize that I do have the faith that I have, and as such can respect and trust the things that I say to them. So I think that has been incredibly important for me to meld my life in a way that I can be a scholar servant in the workplace with people knowing and respecting that I'm a Christian without having to be offensive with that. A few parting thoughts. Certainly your professional journeys, your personal journeys as you leave here will have ups and they'll have downs. They'll have happy points and maybe some not so happy points. One thing that I found is the importance of remembering to have fun. I'm not going to use the phrase in my day too often, but in the campus center back then, the Houghton Star had a newspaper dispenser. Sophomore year, I discovered I could fit into it. Let me just make the point that if you can fit in, does not mean you can get yourself out, so choose your friends wisely. I'll also highlight the value of your time, because I sat down in Big Al's on the lower level many moons ago in a guest executive dinner with a leader talking about some of the things that he did in his very high-level position that he needed to then use some of his financial resources to free up his time. And that stuck with me, because while I like the smell of freshly cut grass, the idea of getting out of work at whatever time o'clock in the dark and mowing my lawn, sitting for hours on YouTube figuring out how to do a plumbing job, or getting my groceries are things that I can do, but I would much rather take a bit of the money that Allison and I make and buy back our time. Have some local entrepreneur that I can pay some money to and allow us to invest in our family, in our jobs, in our church, in our relationships by buying back some of our time and having someone mow or do some plumbing work or deliver our groceries to us. Each of you and your families will make a decision of what makes sense, but in our family, this made sense to us. What also made sense to us as a family was to come up with a family mission statement. This hangs over our mantle in our back room. We were encouraged to do it at a marriage conference that we went to. And this talks about why we as Davidsons and our Davidson family are different from Joy Davidson's family and other Davidsons or other Houghton alum or other people from our small group or church. It's meant to show how we are different. And I'll focus on purposeful generosity, and specifically this last line, specific short-term needs. Allison and I, outside of our church, do not give on an ongoing basis to any organization. I have seen people who have given money to a cause that mattered to them, and they continue that for 3, 5, 10, 15 years, to the point where they might not even be in contact with that person, but they feel obligated. I want to protect and guard my heart to be a cheerful giver as a family. So we pick short-term needs to be able to give to so that we're always reflecting where we feel God is leading at that point. There's nothing wrong with giving recurringly to a mission organization or to any other recurring need, but for our family, this is how we're different, and you can think about how your lives will be different, either as individuals or as couples. The value of relationships, critically important. The picture in the top left, Allison and I with Nate and Joy, was taken less than 2 months ago, picking apples in Allentown. When time came for us to strut on the day of my wedding, Nate was my best man. Bob went ahead and married us. They both were a part of our wedding party. Joy was not strutting with us, but she read scripture that day. Also, on the other one, you'll see a new face, Nick Furman. Incredible guy there with Bob and I. And we started a tradition many moons ago of getting back together each year. And earlier this year, we celebrated our Sweet 16. 16 years running. If we had cars for our get-togethers, it would be that we were old enough to drive now. And we have never missed a year. We call it Bob Fest because we got together at Bob's house the first couple of years. It started as a reliving the glory days of Houghton, but has emerged and grown and developed to rich and deep relationships as we each have gone through the ups and downs of life. But yet we still manage to wear our Shen shirts, and when we get out of an escape room, we name ourselves the Highlander 3. So Houghton continues to be that thing that brings us back together. Gain experiences, figure out how to put them together later. It's the adage I was given many, many years ago. It has served me well in my career. It has served me well in my life. And through the relationships I developed here, it has continued across this time. And you'll remember I mentioned Professors Bates and Gardy. Well, they get an email from me and me from them a couple times a year for 17 years because they were influential then and they have continued to be influential since. And so think about the experiences you can gain now and into the future. Don't feel that you have to have a perfect solution for what your life is going to look like. God may use you in amazing ways moving forward. With that, we're going to transition to a time of Q&A. As I mentioned, I have plenty of reference slides depending on how the conversation goes. Let me open it up, see any questions people might have. Come now. Yes.
So when you moved to Allentown, you didn't know anybody?
Yep.
So how did you build a community and build relationships?
Outstanding question. So how did I build relationships? Many of my relationships back then, and certainly how my wife and I have continued, has been in and around our church families. So when I was here, I had been put in touch with a leader at a local organization in the Allentown area, and I happened to know the church that they attended, a very large evangelical free church. That was the same denomination that my dad had been a pastor in. And so I decided to go to their young adults event one early Friday night, probably within the first 3 weeks of being there. And for me, I grew up in a really small church. There were 4 in our high school youth group. Me, my brother, and 2 others. So all of a sudden I was in this church of about 1,200, where there was maybe 150 to 200 young adults, and I fell in love with that sense of community, of being a part of that. And that started to build many of the relationships in my life. In fact, I talked about how there were many ups and downs and challenges in the first 9 months after leaving Houghton. One of those was the fact that I ended up laying in a hospital bed, diagnosed with adult onset type 1 diabetes, out of the blue. No family history, in a totally new community, with no family nearby. And while family eventually did come and get to see me, spend time with me, it was the young adults pastor and my friends from that group, after only 7 or 8 months at that time, that were there that very night, maybe the next day, but certainly within the first 24 hours at my bedside, being that community, being that relationship. And so continuing to cultivate relationships with the church community in which we're planted, as well as professional relationships through work, has been critically important to us, especially since we've never lived close to family since relocating post-college. Great question. Other questions?
Well, they're formulating their questions because I know
Yes.
they all have questions that they're going to ask. Could you put back up that slide with the books?
Absolutely.
Because I noticed several people trying to snap pictures of that.
Oh, I'd love to.
Might not have gotten a chance to.
Here you go.
I know that I am constantly saying, by the way, read this book in all of your spare time. And they all laugh at me because they say we don't have any spare time. But there you go, students. Several more books that you can read in all of your spare time.
I grew up outside of Boston, as I mentioned, 7.5 hours to and from Houghton. Granted, I sometimes was carpooling. Some of you may be driving shorter or longer, but even today as I drive back for 4.5 to 5 hours to Allentown, I will be listening on Audible, typically on 2.25 speed, so I can get through a little bit faster, to different books and content, podcasts and things, so I can continue to learn. Since 10 might be a little overwhelming, if I were to boil it down to 3, The Advantage. You could read anything by Pat Lencioni. He writes most of his books as leadership fables. They're outstanding. The Advantage brings his theories on organizational health together. StrengthsFinder, understanding what your strengths are and how you can leverage and use them. And Mindset, being able to think about the mindset that you have, that you can spend the time and effort to learn things. Those three would be the three that I would especially highlight as a nice starting point, recognizing that you have reading that you're doing anyway for your classes.
And I'll just add, principals and management students, if you didn't make the connection, Pat Lencioni is who wrote the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team that you are reading for your discussion forums, or supposed to be reading for your discussion forums. And we use StrengthsFinder in the senior capstones, so you will necessarily be exposed to some of these anyway. But other questions? All right, I've got another one. Go for it. You mentioned, you touched on how your faith plays a role in the workplace. Sometimes we're given the message that Christianity and the workplace don't meld. Have you found that you've struggled with that at all, and how has your faith played a role in what you've done?
Sure. So I think faith and the workplace certainly can meld. I think each of us certainly needs to be mindful and thoughtful to being in a workplace that enables us to be able to live our lives in the way that we're looking to do. So for example, there are certain employers I would not look to work for because of the type of work they may be involved in. There also might be some organizational climates that would be looking to ask for me to violate my principles or ask me to do something that I'm not comfortable with. And then I would have to look at how to separate myself from that situation. I, however, have been very blessed to be in a variety of organizations where they have understood that I may have different views than they do, but don't have to be exactly like they are. Now, certainly, I need to be mindful of how I come across, that I certainly don't want to be offensive or high and mighty about the fact that I may choose not to be involved in something where some others may, or I may choose not to use language. I don't want this to be I'm better than anyone at all. But I think especially having gone to a public school through my elementary, middle, and high school years, I had grown fairly comfortable with being able to be different and not have my integrity suffer as a part of being different from those around me. Dr. Wright can certainly keep going. He's well prepared, but this is an opportunity, please.
What drew you to your current employer over other employers in that area?
So really good question. So when I first started in the Lehigh Valley, I was at the world headquarters for Mack Trucks. I was an indefinite temp there, supporting them in the HR field, and Mack was going through a lot of transitions. It had just been bought by Volvo. They were relocating a number of positions, and it became clear to me that job was never going to become permanent. So I was looking at different employers and different organizations, and what drew me to LVHN was being able to join an organization in the HR field, which I had really focused a lot on during my time here at Houghton, and the fact that they had that need. Because they were growing at that time, I think they had about 6,000 with a plan to get to 8 or 10,000 employees, maybe to 12. If you remember today, we're close to 20. That growth and flexibility was really attractive to me. I ended up actually taking a position that did not require a college degree, but it gave me great experiences. I was able to get to really hone a lot of my skills, learn a lot of things, and so it ended up being a great fit for me. Truthfully, going in, I didn't think I would be in that role long, but God kind of let me really flourish in that position for 5 years before meeting Allison, moving away, and then later boomeranging back. Thank you. Yes?
What's Allison's field?
Allison's field is the field of statistics. So I give her all the credit in the world. Because numbers, I'm good with them to an extent, but I certainly don't have her knowledge and expertise. And she specializes in working certainly with students interested in math and statistics, but also those that might be in fields like business, psychology, biology, on how the numbers apply to their fields.
Question over here.
Yes?
Do you have any advice for anyone who wants to enter human resource management?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think in the interest of human resource management, what's important to understand and to look for is what exposure you might want to have. So I joined a fairly large organization. The larger you get, the more specialized you become. And so if you are someone that wants to get a really good sense of a lot of different areas of HR, you want to do compensation and benefits and employee relations and employee development and recruitment and all those fields, I would encourage you to focus on slightly smaller organizations because you tend to be more of a generalist in many of those settings. For me, when I came back to the Lehigh Valley, I had just been working in organizational development and wanted to continue to explore that field. So I knew at that point that I needed to look at larger organizations. The typical ratio, and it varies a little bit, is 1 to 100. It's about when you get to 100 employees that you hire your first dedicated HR person. And they will tend to be a generalist. As you continue to grow, and certainly you eventually get to economies of scale, but you tend to focus on other areas of HR before you get to organizational development. That usually happens at about the 1,000 employee mark. That's usually the point where you have 10 HR people and one person is really going to focus on OD. So when I came back to the region, I started looking at employers that were at least 1,000 employees or larger because I wanted to be able to work in an HR capacity within OD. And I wanted to, if possible, to be embedded in that organization. When you're smaller than 1,000, you're probably going to hire a consultant to do some of your OD work. So for me, looking at that organizational size and thinking what you want exposure to can be really two helpful techniques to finding a nice opportunity. The thing to remember is every organization needs HR. Some may outsource it. Many will have it internal, but every organization needs to be able to deal with HR issues. It's such a critical field.
From your Houghton time, Jonathan, what do you think most prepared you for the journey you've been on? And what's the one thing you wish you'd known back when you were a student, besides you should get a job before you graduate?
Yes, certainly a good one. I think what has prepared me best would be going back to those relationships. Going through the different things in life, having the connections, and I only focused on just a few friends and professional relationships. I think that was critically important to my Houghton time. Certainly the classwork was helpful and prepared me well. I had the privilege of representing Houghton at the Society for Human Resource Management's HR Games when I was a senior. But I think the relationships far and away was the biggest factor. But the second part of your question, what do I think I had known at the time? Well, that's going to take me to one of these books. And I'll just give you a primer, but I mentioned if you're going to go with one of the top 3 books, go with Mindset. Mindset is research by a professor named Dr. Carol Dweck. She did studies that basically looked at the idea that people have one of 2 mindsets. A fixed mindset where you like to show off just how smart you are and your knowledge is kind of fixed. And a growth mindset where frankly at the end of the day you can learn by putting in the time and effort if you want to. If I were to reflect back on my Houghton time, I was more of this fixed mindset. I was proud of how smart I might be. I was proud, despite a grade that may not have helped my GPA, that I went through a literature class without ever reading a book. Not the smartest thing if I were to go back and talk to freshman Jonathan. I recognize now that there is time effort and work that you can put into to accomplishing things. And there are fascinating research studies in this book that talk about work they did with children around that. At the end of the day, I don't want to go through the time and effort and work that it takes to become a physician. Could I? Sure, I could probably do that. I'll make the trade-off, but deciding to make that trade-off is very different from saying, I can't do that. And so for me, if I were to go back to Houghton and go back to talk to Jonathan of many moons ago, I would say embrace a growth mindset, be willing to put in the work. And I think that's part of why my GPA changed dramatically as I went into my master's programs. I had real world experience, I had my foundation here at Houghton, but I also put in the time and effort to be able to be successful.
Excellent.
Other questions? Yes.
How long after your undergrad did you get your MBA?
Great question. So I graduated in '05. I started my Master's of Arts in Business Communication in about '07, finishing it in 2011. And then my MBA I went back for in 2013 and finished it in 2014. Now, here's a little inside track for you. Your time here at Houghton, 120, 125 credits, huge investment of time and effort and resources. Most masters, outside of like your Masters in Divinity, typically about 12 classes, 36 credits. And when you earn one master's in a similar field to your second master's, I transferred in half of my program. I only had to take 6 classes to be able to earn that MBA. I did it online as well, so I had that flexibility to take it as quickly or as slowly as I wanted. And by joining a large organization that had a tuition reimbursement program, I did that whole master's for under $1,000 out of my pocket. Now, I would be able to do it for free because LVHN offers up to $5,000 per year, 100% reimbursable for degree level programs of benefit to the organization. It was 85% a few years ago. I'm okay with that.
Why did you, what value did you find in adding that second master's? Because obviously you had a successful career
Sure.
and then you went back and added this later on.
Yeah, so I'd say there were 2 factors that helped with the MBA. One, truthfully, initials. MBA is far more recognized, sometimes derided, but usually respected than many other degrees. People didn't know what a Master's of Arts in Business Communication was, so I had to explain it to them. So I knew there would be a certain assumption around the level of knowledge and expertise that people would give me by having that MBA. But also, when I was here at Houghton and in my first master's, they really embraced the areas of business communication that I liked. And I wasn't as into some of the communication sides like radio and television, nor the business sides like finance and supply chain management. I recognize that not having some of those business sides might be a detriment to me in the future. So going back allowed me to bolster some of those skills in those areas and develop a little bit more competency there. I'd say those are the 2 main things that helped. Now with that said, Dr. Wright, I think we are up against the end of time.
We are. I know that some of you have 10 o'clock classes that you have to get to, and those of you in my principles and management class, we would normally let you out at 9:50, so we'll do that. I believe Jonathan is willing to hang out a little bit if you have
Absolutely.
any questions that you would like to ask him. Before we go, let's just thank him for his time.